Frank Sinatra walked off the stage at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas on a Friday night in 1962 when he heard something that stopped him cold in the backstage hallway. Someone was crying. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep you try to hide it from the world. The kind of crying that says you've run out of options and hope and you don't know what to do anymore. Frank had just finished 2 shows back to back. He was exhausted. His voice was raw. His throat felt like he'd been swallowing broken glass. He wanted nothing more than to get to his dressing room, have a drink, and disappear for the night. But he heard that sound, and something in him wouldn't let him keep walking. What Frank did in the next hour didn't just change one man's life. It proved that behind the swagger and the spotlight, behind the tuxedos and the sold-out shows, Frank Sinatra understood something most people never learn. That real power isn't about what you can take. It's about what you give when nobody's watching. It was October 12th, 1962, the Sands Hotel and Casino, Las Vegas, Nevada. Frank Sinatra was at the peak of his powers. The Rat Pack was in full swing. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford. They owned Vegas. Every show was sold out weeks in advance. Every night was a party that lasted until dawn. Frank was 46 years old and he was untouchable. The chairman of the board, old Blue Eyes, the voice. He could sell out any venue in the world with a single phone call. He had the #1 album in the country. He had Hollywood at his feet. Presidents called him for favors. He had power, money, and respect. The kind of respect that makes men step aside when you walk into a room. But on that Friday night in October, none of that mattered. Frank had just finished his second show of the night. 2 hours on stage, 2 full sets, 40 songs. His voice was shot. His throat felt like sandpaper. Every note in that last song had hurt, but the crowd had loved it. Standing ovation, screaming, women throwing hotel room keys onto the stage, marriage proposals shouted from the balcony, the usual chaos. Frank's bodyguard, Jilly Rizzo, had cleared a path through the backstage area so Frank could get to his dressing room without being mobbed by hangers-on, reporters, and people who just wanted to say they'd shaken Frank Sinatra's hand. The hallway was supposed to be empty. Security had cleared everyone out. Nobody was allowed back there except essential personnel. But as Frank walked down that hallway, his tie loosened, his tuxedo jacket slung over his shoulder, sweat still soaking through his dress shirt, he heard it. Crying, quiet, broken, the sound of a man who thought nobody could hear him. Frank stopped. Jilly kept walking for a few steps before he realized Frank wasn't behind him anymore. "Boss?" Frank held up his hand. "You hear that?" Jilly listened. "Sounds like someone's upset. Security probably missed somebody. I'll handle it." Frank shook his head. "No, I'll handle it." He walked toward the sound. At the end of the hallway, near the service entrance where the cleaning staff came and went, there was a small utility closet. The door was half open. Inside, sitting on an overturned bucket with his face in his hands, was an elderly man in a janitor's uniform. His shoulders were shaking. He was crying like his heart was breaking. Frank walked up to the door and knocked gently on the frame. "Hey, you okay, friend?" The man's head snapped up. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was streaked with tears. When he saw who was standing there, his expression went from shock to mortification. He scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over the bucket. "Mr. Sinatra, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll get out of your way." His voice was shaking. Frank stepped into the closet. It was barely big enough for 2 people. It smelled like bleach and old mops. "What's your name?" The man wiped his face with the back of his hand. Henry Coleman, sir." Frank extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Henry. You want to tell me why you're crying in a closet?" Henry looked down at his feet. He was maybe 65 years old. His hands were gnarled and rough from decades of manual labor. His uniform was clean but worn thin in places. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sinatra. I shouldn't be here. I got some bad news today, and I needed a minute, and I didn't know where else to go." His voice cracked. Frank didn't move. "What kind of bad news?" Henry hesitated. He looked at Frank like he couldn't believe this was happening. Frank Sinatra standing in a janitor's closet, asking about his problems. This man who just commanded a stage in front of 2,000 people. This man whose voice was on every radio in America. Standing here asking a janitor why he was crying. My son, he's in Vietnam. He got injured 2 weeks ago. Took shrapnel in his leg during a firefight outside Da Nang. They operated on him at a field hospital, stopped the bleeding, pulled out what they could. But the infection set in fast. They had to evacuate him to a hospital in Saigon. Henry's voice broke again. They're saying he needs another surgery, a specialist. The kind of surgery the Army hospital can't do. He needs to go to a private hospital, and I don't have that kind of money. I don't have anything close to that kind of money. Frank's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. How much money? Henry shook his head. I shouldn't have said anything. It's not your problem, Mr. Sinatra. I'm sorry. I'll go. He tried to move past Frank, but Frank put a hand on his shoulder, gently. Henry, how much money? Henry looked at him. There were fresh tears in his eyes. They're saying $2,500, maybe more depending on complications. I've been working here for 18 years. I make decent money for what I do. I'm not complaining, but I don't have that. I've got maybe $300 in savings. My wife's been sick, diabetes, medical bills every month, insulin, doctor visits. We don't have anything left. I've been trying to figure out if I can get a loan, but the banks won't give me one. I'm too old, too much debt already. He wiped his face again. I don't know what to do. He's my only son. He's 22 years old. He joined up because he wanted to serve his country. He believed in it. And now he's laying in a hospital bed in Vietnam, and I can't help him. What kind of father can't help his own son? Frank was quiet for a moment. He looked at Henry, really looked at him, saw the worn uniform, the calloused hands, the face lined with years of hard work and worry. This was a man who'd spent his life doing honest work, who'd raised a son to believe in something bigger than himself, who was now standing in a closet crying because he couldn't protect that son. Frank knew something about that, about wanting to protect people you love and feeling helpless. Then he said, "What's your son's name?" Michael Coleman. Frank nodded slowly. Okay, Henry, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home tonight. You're going to call whoever you need to call and tell them that Michael is going to get that surgery. The best surgeon they can find in Saigon. The best hospital, the best care. And you're not going to worry about the money, not $1 of it. Henry stared at him. Mr. Sinatra, I can't ask you to. Frank held up his hand. You didn't ask, I'm telling you. Your son served his country. The least his country can do is make sure he gets the care he needs. And if the country won't do it, I will. Henry's legs nearly gave out. He grabbed the edge of a shelf to steady himself. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Frank looked at him, really looked at him. Because you're standing in a closet crying about your son, and I've got more money than I know what to do with. That's why. He pulled out his wallet. It was thick with bills. He pulled out every bill in there. Had to be at least $500 or $600. He held it out to Henry. This is for right now, tonight, so you can sleep knowing you've got something. Tomorrow you give me the information about where Michael is, what hospital he needs to go to, who the doctors are. My people will handle it, all of it. Henry took the money with shaking hands. He looked at it, then at Frank, then back at the money. I don't know what to say. Frank smiled, a real smile, not the stage smile. You don't have to say anything. Just take care of your wife. Take care of yourself. And when Michael gets home, you tell him Frank Sinatra says thank you for his service. Henry broke down. He just stood there, holding that money, crying. Not quiet crying anymore. Full, sobbing, crying. Frank put his hand on Henry's shoulder and let him cry. Jilly was standing in the hallway watching, but he didn't say a word. After a minute, Frank said, Henry, you get yourself together and go home. Come find me tomorrow. We'll sort out the details. Henry nodded, unable to speak. Frank patted his shoulder one more time and walked out of the closet. Jilly followed. They walked down the hallway toward Frank's dressing room. Jilly waited until they were inside and the door was closed before he spoke. That was a good thing you did, boss. Frank poured himself a Jack Daniels. Neat. It wasn't a thing, Jilly. It was the right thing. He took a drink. Guy's son is bleeding in Vietnam, and he's cleaning toilets at the Sands to make ends meet. That's not right. The next day, Henry Coleman came to the Sands. He had the information: hospital name, doctor's name, contact numbers. Frank's assistant made phone calls. Within 48 hours, Michael Coleman was transferred to a private hospital in Saigon. The surgery was performed by one of the best orthopedic surgeons in Asia. The bill was paid in full. Frank Sinatra's name was never attached to it. The paperwork just said anonymous donor. Michael Coleman recovered. The surgery was successful. The specialist found and removed all the remaining shrapnel fragments, fixed the damaged nerves, repaired the muscle tissue. It took 3 operations over 6 weeks, but Michael's leg was saved. He spent 3 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again, building back his strength. And then in January 1963, he was medically discharged from the Army with an honorable discharge and a Purple Heart. He came home to Las Vegas on a cold winter morning. Henry Coleman met his son at the airport. Michael came off the plane on crutches, thinner than he'd been when he left, his face harder, older. But he was alive. He was whole. He was home. Henry saw him come through the gate, and he broke down crying right there in the terminal. Michael dropped one of his crutches and hugged his father with one arm. They stood there for a long time, both of them crying, not caring who saw. When Michael asked him what was wrong, Henry told him the story, about the night he'd been crying in the closet, about Frank Sinatra, about everything. Michael Coleman wanted to thank Frank. He wanted to write him a letter, call him, something. He wanted to look the man in the eye and tell him what his generosity had meant, but Henry said no. Mr. Sinatra didn't do this for thanks. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was right, because he saw a father who couldn't help his son, and he had the power to fix it. The best way we can thank him is by living good lives, by being the kind of people who help others when we can, by remembering what he did and passing it on. Michael understood, but he never forgot. Years later, when Michael became a high school history teacher in Las Vegas, he would tell his students the story, not to brag, not to name drop, not to say, "I knew Frank Sinatra," but to teach them something important. That kindness doesn't come with a spotlight. That real generosity happens in the shadows. That the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching, when the cameras are rolling, when there's something to gain, but what they do when no one will ever know, when there's nothing in it for them except the knowledge that they helped someone who needed help. Henry Coleman worked at the Sands for another 12 years. Every time Frank Sinatra played there, Henry made sure his area was spotless. He never approached Frank, never asked for anything, never brought up that night. But Frank knew. Sometimes when Frank would walk through the backstage area, he'd see Henry mopping a floor or emptying a trash can, and he'd give him a nod, just a little nod, and Henry would nod back. That was their understanding. No words needed. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. He was 82 years old. The whole world mourned. Presidents, movie stars, musicians, millions of fans. The newspapers wrote about his music, his movies, his legendary status. But Henry Coleman, who was 91 years old by then and living in a nursing home, mourned something different. He mourned the man who'd stopped in a hallway and asked a janitor why he was crying. The man who'd given away money like it was nothing, because to Frank, it was nothing compared to a father's love for his son. At Frank's funeral, the famous people were all there. The Rat Pack survivors, Hollywood royalty. But Henry Coleman watched it on television from his nursing home room, and he cried, not for the chairman of the board, not for old Blue Eyes, for the man who'd stood in a janitor's closet and said, "Your son served his country. The least his country can do is make sure he gets the care he needs." Michael Coleman became a teacher. He taught history. And every year when his students studied the Vietnam War, he would tell them about Frank Sinatra. Not about the music, not about the movies, about the night a legend stood in a closet with a janitor and proved that power without compassion is worthless, that fame without humanity is empty, that the real measure of greatness is how you treat people when you don't have to treat them well at all. That's the Frank Sinatra story that should be told. Not just the swagger in the songs, not just the Rat Pack in the spotlight, But the man who heard someone crying and couldn't walk past. The man who asked questions when he could have ignored the answers. The man who used his wealth to help a stranger's son because it was the right thing to do. Frank Sinatra wasn't perfect. He had his demons, he had his flaws. But on a Friday night in October 1962, in a backstage hallway at the Sands Hotel, Frank Sinatra showed the world what it means to be human. And that's a legacy worth remembering.